Hey guys, this is Alan Potter here. I am actually going to be talking to you guys today. My presentation is about the cybercrime um, involvement from Russia into Georgia, and then in 2014, Russia into the Ukraine, and kind of what that looked like and what effects that actually had on the world. Myself personally, my Marine Corps unit was deployed over to the Ukraine. I didn't go with them due to a medical issue I had, but it was really interesting and unique to hear a lot of the stories from guys from my unit after they came back, and see what what they had to say about dealing with the Georgians and honestly their fear in dealing with Russia, and the chance of invasion because they had legitimately been attacked. Um, so going forward, that attack in July and August of 2008, according to an article I read by John Markoff, was actually the first time cyber warfare actually happened. And how they did this was they started off by using distributed denial of service attacks to shut down government websites and communication systems on or about July 20th, 2008. This got so bad that they actually were able to shut down the Georgian president, Mikhail Saakashvili. I cannot pronounce the last name, I'm sorry. His website had been shut down for 24 hours, and it was seemed in an after-action review of this that was a test for what the Russians were going to do going forward, how they were going to use this attack to get an advantage later. So then they proceeded to then follow along, conduct these communication distributed denial of service attacks again, and then move troops in, and then there was actual shooting. So that's what's really unique about this, is that's really never been done before. There's never been a shut down an infrastructure and then move in with military forces. We can see in this instance a landlocked country with another country, that could be something that's extremely devastating to have happen. And in this case, it could have led to something much greater than it was. Obviously, people were killed, and there was fighting, but it at least ended. And then Russia again did it in the Ukraine in 2014, and it was really a very similar scenario, but a little bit lesser of a scale. So, as far as cyber war defined by Martin and Begg, there must be a deliberate and apparent actions taken in cyberspace and approved by a military commander to further battlefield objectives while also allowing friendly forces to maneuver. Well, in this case, we can clearly see that, in the Russian situation, they were definitely trying to advance their own tactics, and they were trying to hinder their opponents, which in this case was the Georgians. Whether it was justified or unjustified, that is not what this is about. This is simply looking at the cybercrime aspect, or cyber warfare aspect of it, and how dangerous of a threat that can become. So some of the points that we can kind of look at to see what could cyber warfare do, what would it be utilized for in order for a nation, even a terrorist organization, which is a legitimate threat still today, to use against another country, namely the United States, Europe, Italy, France, some of the other countries that were listed in the assignment. But I mean, really, any country is actually susceptible to this. So I mean, using it to gain strategic advantage on an opponent, that's just a given, pretty much. But really, it could also be used in another way. Rather than just trying to move your forces forward, what if it was used to disrupt communication? What if it was used to just stop enemy troop movement, to deny them achieving their objective? Not necessarily furthering, moving your own forces into an area, but really just stopping something from happening. So it could be stopping a counterattack on your own forces or things like that. So what could we expect from a cyber attack? I mean, I think our response is probably the biggest part of it. How can we handle some type of response? Now, a lot of people might think that, and myself slightly included until I did this assignment, that maybe the US wouldn't be a big target for this. That's not even true. I mean, you can get from Europe over to the United States, or you can even come up through Mexico in a matter of hours. It would be very simple uh, for a militarized force to hide themselves, shut down our defense grid if they actually achieved that, and then move in. And that would be an invasion. That would be a legitimate threat. Is it feasible right now? Probably not, but it is something that could happen. So, what would we want to do if this were to take place? First, how stable would our country be after that? I mean, what would that look like? What would it look like to see a response from not only our government but our citizens? A lot of us think that as a nation we're very powerful, we're almost untouchable, and then unfortunately tragedies happen. 9/11 being one of them, the shooting in Orlando, the shooting in California, um, other terrorist bombings, even in the world. It kind of makes you take a step back and realize, well, we're not as untouchable as we think we are. Because when it comes to any type of cyber action, especially pertaining to this aspect, where there's a will, there is a way to do it, and it just needs somebody that really wants to do it, and it can happen. The scary part is how easily can it happen. So, say this happened and we stopped it. For sake of argument, let's say North Korea came in, conducted a cyber attack against our country, and we essentially stopped it before they were able to get on any soil or really move any navy or anything like that into position. So we'd have to look at, okay, what can we do to stop this? Well, currently, one of the biggest things that we do as a country is we put sanctions on other nations to stop trade, to stop them from trading with others, tax them for anything that they export. But in realism, what does that actually stop? And that's more of a political debate for later. But that is one way we could respond, and we could try to stop this from occurring again, is to essentially attack the country back without using physical force, which is something that a lot of us, our nations in the world, are trying to avoid on a regular basis because it is essentially senseless killing. So we would really need to reevaluate what do we do for our defense systems, our power grid, financial industries, and things like that to enable us to stay safe after the fact. So it would make degrees like mine much more valuable, because looking at this risk analysis portion of it and seeing what we could do to try to prevent these attacks. So what type of techniques, what software could be developed, what practices could we put in place that would prevent this from going forward. And honestly, constant security checks for any breaches, for any hacks, anything like that, any potential malware, Trojans, need to be resolved or dealt with almost immediately. The problem with this is it costs a lot of money to do. So is it feasible? Yes, it is feasible. It's just, it needs to be put out there that, this is something that not only companies but our government needs to spend a little bit more money on to help protect ourselves and our way of life. Secondly, by doing that, educating people. A big part of that would be just incorporating safe internet practices and computer use practices in schools across the country. Making that standardized would definitely help just give everybody a general understanding now of what could happen, what you could be exposing yourself to just on the internet, and building that foundation, because this technology obviously is not going away. It's not going to change at all. So let's evolve with it, and let's learn as a society how to protect ourselves using it, because it's certainly useful. I mean, it's allowing me to do this, which would not have been able to be done 5, 15, 20 years ago. So in any event, looking at our responses, it would basically look at how would we respond to each attack that could potentially happen. So let's say a power grid went down and there was some type of military action to take place. Well, we can't just have one response, because there's always a counter response that could happen. So you need to have contingency plans upon contingency plans upon contingency plans in order to try to stop that and thwart it almost instantly. So how do we prepare? Well, as I had previously said, routine tasks to ensure that we're ready for any type of attack. Um, Potentially working with the UN or NATO in order to try to spread some, I guess, the danger of this to all nations, so they really understand what could happen to them, and working with each other to just kind of help make everybody a little bit safer, because what does happen to one country can certainly happen to another. Um, and to learn from that and to share that type of information without exposing any secrets, of course, uh, would be beneficial to everybody altogether. Constant simulations, um, having been in the military, going through training exercises just on units that are designed to specifically respond to this sort of incident. Not just the National Guard, I'm talking specialized units that actually know how to deal with this. And not just deal with a military application and dealing with, a financial collapse, maybe our defense grid goes down. No, I'm actually referring to being able to deal with the public and how to address them, because if something like that happens, yes, the media will help us give a good message, but having people on the ground that actually have a good way to communicate how this will go forward to the local populace would be a benefiting factor. Again, and that ties a little bit into the education. So, how do we continue to respond to this? You know, as I had said before, putting strict sanctions on nations like North Korea. So financial interests should not be a factor in response to these nations, such as China's attacks that are currently happening. They actually have done little attacks here and there on different organizations or companies, and now it's not the Chinese government specifically, but they haven't really done anything to stop it. So what are we doing to prevent that? Because if they're allowing it to happen, well, why? Why would they allow that to continue to happen with us, who we keep giving money to on a regular basis? So it just doesn't make sense. It's as if we're kind of, you're poking the bear, just trying to see what type of reaction they can get. And that's really a good way for anybody who's going to conduct these types of attacks to start. Be like, okay, well, what can I get away with? What works? What's not going to work? Okay, how do I move about this? How do I change this to go forward next time? Now, if say they do it to us and they get caught and they're, exposed or whatnot, doesn't mean that they're not going to try it on another nation. So that's where the sharing of information actually would help quite a bit. Let's see. Potential problems with conducting our own counterattacks. If a country attacks us using cyber warfare or just a standard cyber attack just to mess with our way of life, say we respond the same way, what would happen then? Obviously nothing good, because it could just lead to escalation of, well, they took down our power grid. Okay, fine, we took down their defense grid. Okay, fine, they fired the first shot. We fired the next shot, and so on and so forth. Then it's stacking. You have mobile forces on the ground, and where to go from there. Then you lead to an all-out war, which obviously none of us really do want. So in here, I also decided to kind of delve into a little bit of the reality versus fiction in this, which was kind of unique because a lot of us have probably watched movies and seen things that relate to these sorts of topics on a regular basis. So, first off, if any of you have actually seen the movie Die Hard 4, there's a term, it's called a fire sale. And that's where there's three stages of attack, where they attack the power grid, the financial grid, and then a government attack using cybercrime, cyber warfare type attack. According to Graham, that this is something that if it was put in conjunction with a military strike, if it was just that well thought out, it could cripple any country. It doesn't have to be us, it could be anybody. Shutting down a power grid, shutting down finances and banking for a country, or even a portion of that country, would be devastating to that portion, because it would create panic almost instantly. It would take hours before people were really worried and scared of something seriously bad happening, because now they can't communicate and they don't have any money to do anything with, because all of us put our monies in the bank, in banks that are, accessed through our credit cards. So that would be something that would be very, very difficult to comprehend that it actually could happen. But again, if there was enough effort put into that and an organization really wanted to do it, they could. Obviously, they would need to find some type of military force to ally with in order to make this happen. But, that would be the, next level. Another thing, these types of attacks do not just happen. You do not sit down and just hack into a computer software system in 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Again, as we see in the movies, that's not a thing that's actually a real concept that can happen. In this part, so in conclusion, it's really just an interesting thing to see what cyber warfare actually could look like, what it does, sorry for my phone, and how we could potentially respond to it. Now, I will say personally, I do think that we are slightly less likely than a lot of other nations to fall victim to an attack like this. Specifically, yes, because we have giant oceans on the other side of us. And secondly, if ground forces were to come in, they would have to either A, come through Canada, or B, come through Mexico. It just doesn't seem like a feasible attack option from a military standpoint, because we would know what was happening in Mexico before it got to us, and we would know what's happening in Canada before it got to us. So I just don't think that that would be too feasible. However, countries like Italy, France, even Russia, even though they've been ones that have, the first ones to actually do cyber warfare ever, according to, some articles that I checked out for this, they are viable targets for a well thought out and orchestrated attack that could actually cause some serious damage if it was executed well. The thing that I would say would be challenging would be terrorist organizations doing this. I think that might be our biggest threat, is if ISIS or ISIL actually decided that they wanted to attack a country this way. That could create it, in America especially, a 9/11 sized event. That's not unreasonable. It's not unpredictable, actually. It's just a matter of, if they organize themselves just right, it's something that could happen and would affect us as a nation very badly. And in my own personal feelings, I do think that a serious cyber attack could happen at any time, simply because it just hasn't happened yet. And the reason for this is it was actually discussed slightly by Brandy in her post in Economic Crime, but it's a matter of, it goes back to the education and the funding to train individuals and organizations for this. Our government clearly has an understanding of why this is important, and why cyber warfare attacks, cyber attacks in general, denial of service attacks, the list goes on, why they are a threat and why they can do some serious harm to us as a country. But what's being done to make that better? What can we do? And honestly, that's not a question that I can answer, but going forward, intelligence that we gather is stuff that we need to, pertaining to cyber warfare, stuff that we need to really look into and look at as a legitimate concern, and what could be done going forward. Because going back to Georgia and the Ukraine, these at least situations were stopped through political means and not through violence. Yes, there was some violent acts that happened, but it was through negotiations and other nations getting involved to just try to stop the situation before it actually blew up and got really dangerous for everyone involved, including countries on the other side of the world. In closing, I definitely think that this is a legitimate threat, and we could potentially expect these types of troop movement, to follow some sort of cyber attack, but I really think it would depend on the cyber attack itself. If it was a cyber attack on, our defense grid, absolutely. That's probably something that we would see have some military mobility after the fact. If it was something that was pertaining to a satellite systems, taking down our national satellites, that would also result in it. But if it was something like, the Sony hack, the attacks on, or the hacks in like Target or Best Buy, I mean, those types of attacks, that's not going to result in any type of mobile military operation. Really, we're looking large scale, very large attacks that are going to shut down national resources, and those are the things that would probably warrant a potential military mobilization to come into our nation, or at least to mobilize outside of us. It doesn't necessarily mean that there have to be enemy combatant boots on the ground, but it could mean that foreign navy was lining up in the ocean. So guys, sorry this was such a long video. This was a really interesting topic, and I could probably keep going on it for another 20 minutes. Thank you all very much for watching it, and please let me know any comments or anything you would like me to elaborate on. I will post up some references if you guys would like to see that. Please let me know. Look forward to discussing this more with you, and take care, everybody. Thanks.